50,000 feet above the Earth, a ghost screams through the stratosphere. A silhouette unlike any other, propelled not by the familiar thrum of a propeller, but by an unseen force, leaving a faint, ethereal trail in the deep blue. This isn't a vision from science fiction. This was 1944. This was the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter, a weapon so far ahead of its time it seemed to defy the very laws of aerodynamics. Imagine the terror, the sheer bewilderment, for the Allied pilots who first encountered this apparition. For years, rumors had circulated, hushed whispers of German wonder weapons, of machines capable of impossible speeds. But rumor is a phantom. Reality is a punch to the gut. And for the pilots of the Royal Canadian Air Force's 401 Squadron, on October 5th, 1944, over the tranquil landscape near Asselt, Netherlands, that punch landed with devastating clarity. 5 Spitfire, Mark IX's symbols of Allied air superiority, glinted in the late afternoon sun. Their pilots, seasoned veterans, guardians of the skies. Then squadron leader Smith spotted it. Not a blur, not a speck, but a silver dart, an impossibly fast streak against the canvas of the sky. It wasn't just faster, it was alien. It was a glimpse into a future they hadn't yet dared to imagine. This jet, the Me 262, banked hard, leaving a wisp of exhaust against a sky turning purple with the evening's approach. It screamed past at over 500 miles per hour, leaving the Spitfires, themselves no slouches, feeling like they were standing still. The mathematical reality was brutal. 440 for the jet, compared to the P-51 Mustang's top speed of 437 mph in level flight. In a straight chase, the Me 262 was uncatchable. It was, quite simply, an existential threat. For Allied commanders who had finally wrestled air superiority from the Luftwaffe, this was a moment of profound concern. Could the tide turn? Could the strategic bombing campaign, relentlessly pounding German industry, suddenly face catastrophic losses? Imagine lumbering B-17 flying fortresses, moving at a paltry 180 mph through flak-filled skies, suddenly confronted by these demonic darts that could strike from any angle and vanish before escort fighters could even react. The psychological impact alone was immense. A ripple of unease, a cold dread, spread through every fighter squadron. Air combat had fundamentally changed, and everyone knew it. Captain Chuck Yeager of the 357th Fighter Group, stationed at RAF Leiston, listened to the intelligence briefings with a growing knot in his stomach, absorbing the stark numbers, understanding the potential for disaster. Yet, as with all revolutionary technologies born in the crucible of war, the Me 262 carried within its very design the seeds of its own undoing. It was a paradox, a machine of unparalleled speed, yet tethered by primitive, temperamental technology and hobbled by the desperate, failing infrastructure of a nation on the brink of collapse. The wonder weapon, it turned out, was profoundly vulnerable, and it was this vulnerability that a new breed of Allied fighter pilots, flying their seemingly outmatched propeller-driven P-51 Mustangs, would learn to exploit with devastating precision, transforming the invincible jet into a hunted prey. The story of the Me 262 is a cautionary tale, a vivid demonstration that technological superiority, in isolation, means very little. It's a narrative woven with threads of incredible innovation, human courage, strategic miscalculation, and the relentless, unforgiving realities of logistical warfare. And it's a story that continues to resonate, offering profound lessons on everything from military strategy to the nature of innovation itself. To truly understand the Me-262's inherent weaknesses, we need to delve into the heart of its revolutionary design. The Junkers. WW004 axial flow turbojet engines. These were engineering marvels for their time, a quantum leap forward in propulsion. Each engine churned out around 1,980 pounds of thrust at 8,700 revolutions per minute, an astonishing feat. But they were also the Achilles heel. Think of it. Jet propulsion was entirely new. There was no established playbook, no decades of refinement. The materials science, the fuel chemistry, the manufacturing techniques, all were still in their infancy. Germany, by 1944, was also a nation facing crippling resource shortages. This wasn't just a challenge, it was a systemic handicap. For instance, the turbine blades, the heart of the jet engine, needed to withstand incredibly high temperatures. Ideally, they would be crafted from heat-resistant nickel and chromium alloys, but Germany had precious little of these. Instead, they were forced to use chromodur alloy, a substitute that, while functional, couldn't handle the extreme thermal stress as effectively. This led to a phenomenon called thermal creep, where the blades would slowly deform under heat and pressure. What did this mean in practical terms? It meant abysmal engine life. Under combat conditions, the WW004B engines typically required a full overhaul after just 10 hours of operation. 10 hours. That's perhaps 3 or 4 combat sorties, depending on mission length. A complete engine replacement was usually necessary after a mere 25 hours of service. Imagine the logistical nightmare. Every few missions, an entire aircraft needed its engines ripped out and replaced. This wasn't like changing spark plugs. This was a massive undertaking requiring skilled mechanics, specialized equipment, and, most critically, a steady supply of new engines. Germany's industrial capacity, already crumbling under Allied bombing, could never keep pace. Ground crews, working tirelessly under constant threat, were overwhelmed. This single vulnerability, born of material shortages and nascent technology, meant that a significant portion of the Me-262 fleet was perpetually grounded, awaiting repairs or replacement engines. The wonder weapon often spent more time in the hangar than in the sky. Then there was the fuel. The WW004 engines devoured fuel at an alarming rate, twice that of conventional piston fighters. And it wasn't just any fuel. It required a specialized J2 synthetic fuel, derived from brown coal. In a wartime economy where petroleum was gold, this synthetic fuel was a technological workaround, but one with severe limitations. It was only available at designated facilities. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a strategic handcuff. Me-262 pilots couldn't simply divert to an alternate airfield if their home base was under attack or weathered in. They had to return to one of a handful of specialized bases, transforming these locations into predictable targets for Allied intelligence. But the engines presented an even more immediate tactical problem for the pilots: throttle response. Unlike a piston engine that reacted almost instantly to a pilot's input, the WW004 suffered from significant lag. Advancing the throttle too quickly was a recipe for disaster. It would inject an excessive amount of fuel into the combustion chambers before the airflow could increase to match, causing jet pipe temperatures to skyrocket and turbine blades to overheat. The pilot, in essence, had to nurse the throttles with delicate precision, making gentle, slow adjustments and patiently waiting for the engines to stabilize. Picture this. You're in a dogfight, the world's fastest fighter, but in a split-second decision, you need more power to evade or to gain an advantage. You push the throttle and nothing. Or worse, a surge of heat that threatens to melt your engine. This sluggish response transformed the Me-262 from an agile predator into a vulnerable target during critical moments of combat, a fighter that could outrun anything, but might betray its pilot with a moment's impatience. These engine weaknesses were magnified, spectacularly, during the most critical phases of flight, takeoff and landing. The Me-262, with a wing loading of 294 kilograms per square meter, substantially higher than any contemporary fighter, demanded high speeds for both. Takeoff required exceeding 110 mph. Landing approaches were at similar velocities. During takeoff, after releasing the brakes, the Me-262 needed nearly 30 agonizing seconds to accelerate down the runway and reach flying speed. 30 seconds. Imagine being strapped into the cockpit of the world's most advanced fighter, thundering down a runway, engines straining to develop thrust at low airspeeds for half a minute. For that entire duration, the aircraft was effectively helpless, moving in a predictable straight line, utterly unable to maneuver or rapidly accelerate to escape. It was a sitting duck, a slow-moving target for any Allied fighter that happened to catch it. A pilot's nightmare. Landing approaches were equally perilous, if not more so. As Me-262 pilots descended towards their airfields, fuel gauges often nudging empty after a 60 to 90-minute mission, they had to slow down, configure flaps and landing gear, and again become predictable targets, flying straight and level. The very engines that made the Me-262 invincible at high altitude became heavy anchors during these low-speed phases. The revolutionary design, meant to confer unparalleled advantage, became a death trap during the most fundamental elements of flight. While German engineers struggled to overcome these inherent flaws, Allied intelligence officers at 8th Air Force Headquarters in England were meticulously studying the problem through the late summer and early fall of 1944. They weren't just guessing, they were applying the rigorous principles of intelligence analysis. Photo reconnaissance missions, flown by daring pilots, identified key Me-262 bases: Achmar, Hopsten, Rhein, Lechfeld, and Munich-Riem. These images, often taken under enemy fire, provided crucial pieces of the puzzle. More insights came from the rare gun camera footage captured during the few early jet encounters. Analyzing these precious frames, Allied intelligence confirmed the jet's terrifying high-speed advantages. But, crucially, they also identified its low-speed weaknesses, particularly during takeoff and landing. The combination of specialized fuel requirements and the predictable flight path during these vulnerable phases created an opportunity that Allied strategists quickly seized upon. They knew that Me-262 pilots, having burned through most of their precious J-2 fuel during high-speed interception missions, had to return to these specific airfields. There was no alternative. They couldn't divert. This geographic constraint was the key. If Mustang fighters with their exceptional range and endurance could loiter near these known jet bases, they could ambush the Me-262s during their most exposed moments. This wasn't a tactic for the faint of heart. It demanded immense patience from the pilots, who might spend hours patrolling. It required ample fuel endurance, which the P-51 Mustang possessed in spades. And most importantly, it demanded pilots willing to fly directly into some of the most heavily defended airspace in Germany, risking intense flak and encounters with piston-engine Luftwaffe defenders. But it offered the only reliable method for propeller-driven fighters to engage jets on anything approaching equal terms. It was a chess match, a strategic gamble, where the seemingly weaker piece could win by exploiting the powerful king's predictable movements. The Luftwaffe, to its credit, recognized this vulnerability immediately after the first jet losses. Commanders were not oblivious. They understood the problem, and they reacted with ingenuity and desperation. Extensive flak alleys were installed along the approach and departure corridors to Mi-262 bases. These weren't just scattered guns. These were curtains of fire, meticulously positioned arrays of 88mm guns, 37mm automatic cannons, and quad 20mm systems, designed to create a literal wall of exploding metal that any attacking Allied fighter would have to penetrate. It was a terrifying gauntlet. They also assigned their most advanced piston engine fighters, the formidable Focke-Wulf FW-190D and the rare high-performance TA-152H, to provide top cover, a defensive screen during jet takeoffs and landings. Flight schedules were randomized whenever possible, an attempt to prevent Allied fighters from predicting launch times. Some bases deployed decoy aircraft, tempting attackers into flak traps. Even autobahns near several jet bases were modified into emergency landing strips, with camouflaged parking areas in adjacent woods, allowing Mi-262s to operate from locations Allied intelligence hadn't yet identified. These were not trivial measures. They represented a massive commitment of resources, manpower, and strategic thought. Yet, despite these desperate efforts, the fundamental tactical problem remained unsolvable. The Mi-262s had to take off, and they had to land. And during those phases, they remained defenseless, regardless of how many guns defended them, regardless of how many piston fighters patrolled overhead. The inherent weaknesses in the jet's design, coupled with Germany's systemic resource limitations, created an insurmountable challenge. The stage was set for a new kind of aerial warfare, a brutal game of cat and mouse where the hunter might seem outgunned, but held the ultimate advantage. One of the first Allied pilots to become intimately familiar with the Mi-262 threat was Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group. A mere 21-year-old from Detroit, Drew was already a veteran, having encountered a jet on a previous sortie in early October 1944. His detailed intelligence reports, describing its bewildering capabilities, made him a valuable source. But on October 7, 1944, Drew found himself grounded, facing disciplinary action for an unauthorized victory roll after a successful mission. A pilot, full of adrenaline and perhaps a touch of youthful exuberance, expressing himself in the universal language of the victorious aviator. Little did he know that very same streak of daring would soon be called upon for one of the war's most crucial and dangerous missions. His punishment vanished like smoke when intelligence reported a significant concentration of Mi-262s at Akmer Aerodrome in northwestern Germany. Drew's prior jet encounter, his first-hand knowledge, made him the obvious, indeed, the only choice to lead a fighter sweep against the base. This wasn't just a mission. It was a desperate gamble, a test of a new, audacious tactic. Drew briefed his flight carefully, his voice emphasizing the critical elements: surprise, aggression, and an acceptance of the immense risks involved in flying directly through German flak defenses. His wingman, Second Lieutenant Robert McCandless, a steadfast companion, promised to stay with him, regardless of what happened. This quiet agreement, between two young men flying into the jaws of enemy territory, speaks volumes about the bonds forged in combat. Drew's P-51 Mustang, coded E2D and affectionately nicknamed Detroit Miss, a tribute to his hometown and a symbol of American industrial might, lifted off from RAF Little Walden. Full internal fuel tanks and wing drop tanks gave him nearly 4 hours of endurance, an essential factor for loitering operations. The weather over Germany that October afternoon was broken clouds with good visibility, a gift from the heavens, perfect conditions for spotting aircraft against the ground. Drew led his flight toward Akmer at 15. His eyes tirelessly scanning the sky for any sign, jet contrails, or the telltale flash of sun on polished aluminum, a glint of the future speeding through the past. As they approached the known jet base, Drew spotted them. Two Me-262s positioned on the runway, engines already running, preparing for takeoff. A fleeting window of opportunity. He pushed his throttle full forward, the Merlin engine roaring its protest, and dropped into a dive, building speed and losing altitude with astonishing rapidity. The Me-262s began their takeoff roll just as Drew's Mustang screamed past 400 mph in its dive. The lead jet, piloted by Oberfeldwebel Heinz Arnold, had reached perhaps 80 mph, a dangerously vulnerable speed, when Drew opened fire from 800 yards. His 650 caliber machine guns, the classic instruments of American air power, converged on the accelerating target. Tracers like fiery pearls walked up the runway, finding their mark on the Me-262's right engine. Arnold's jet lurched violently as the engine disintegrated in a shower of sparks and smoke, but his airspeed was already too high to abort the takeoff. The crippled Me-262 staggered into the air on one engine, completely unable to maintain altitude or accelerate. It was a magnificent machine, brought low by a few ounces of lead. Drew, closing to 400 yards, fired again, this time hitting the cockpit area. Arnold's jet rolled inverted and plunged into the trees beside the runway, exploding on impact. A life extinguished, a revolutionary aircraft destroyed, all in a matter of seconds. The second Me-262, flown by Lieutenant Gerhard Kobert, had witnessed Arnold's destruction. In that moment of horror, he attempted to abort his takeoff. But the jet's notorious throttle response and high landing speed made rapid deceleration impossible. Kobert's aircraft was still rolling at high speed when Drew, pulling out of his first attack with the instinct of a predator, immediately repositioned for a second pass. McCandless's voice crackled over the radio, urgent warnings about flak as German gunners, recovering from their surprise, found their range. 88mm shells, black puffs of smoke and fire, burst around the attacking Mustangs. Drew ignored them. He dove again, firing a long, sustained burst into Kobert's Me-262 as it attempted to turn off the runway. Hits sparkled along the fuselage and both engines. The jet slowed, then erupted in flames as its fuel tanks ignited. Kobert, with incredible luck and courage, managed to escape the burning wreck, but his aircraft was a total loss. In less than 2 minutes, Urban Drew, a 21-year-old American pilot, had destroyed 2 of Germany's most advanced fighters using tactics that would become standard doctrine for Allied pilots. The engagement demonstrated conclusively that technological superiority meant nothing during critical flight phases, and that aggression combined with precise timing could neutralize the Me-262 threat. It was a masterpiece of tactical brilliance and raw courage, but the story of Urban Drew doesn't end with triumph. His gun camera, the objective witness of such engagements, jammed during the attack, providing no photographic evidence of his victories. His only witness, McCandless, his loyal wingman, was hit by flak during their harrowing escape from Akmer and shot down, becoming a prisoner of war before he could corroborate Drew's claims. Without gun camera footage or witness statements, 8th Air Force Headquarters, adhering to strict rules of evidence, initially denied Drew's victory credits. A crushing disappointment, a bitter pill to swallow after what was one of the war's most significant tactical achievements. It was a reminder that even in the chaos of war, bureaucracy could exact its own cruel toll. Drew would not receive official recognition until 1983, nearly 40 years later, when German Luftwaffe archives were cross-referenced with American records. Luftwaffe ace Georg Peter Eder, who had been scheduled to lead the Me-262 formation that day, but whose aircraft suffered mechanical problems, confirmed he witnessed a yellow-nosed P-51 dive on the Me-262s, and destroy both jets. Eder couldn't read the name Detroit Miss painted on the Mustang's nose from his position on the ground, but his testimony was sufficient. The United States Air Force awarded Drew the Air Force Cross on May 12, 1983. He remains the first and only Allied pilot to shoot down 2 jet aircraft in a single mission while flying a propeller-driven fighter. A testament to perseverance and a belated recognition of immense courage. Interestingly, on that very same October 7, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke of the 479th Fighter Group may have scored another Me-262 victory, though uncertainty lingers. Zemke, one of the 8th Air Force's most experienced fighter leaders, attacked what he believed was a Bf-109 during a mission over Germany. His gun camera footage was ambiguous, showing an aircraft that could have been either a Messerschmitt Bf-109 or an Me-262. Post-war analysis suggested it was likely a jet, but the victory was never definitively confirmed. What mattered more than these specific victory claims was the emerging pattern. American fighter pilots were discovering that Me-262s, despite their revolutionary speed, could be defeated through tactical innovation. The key was refusing to engage jets in their element, high-altitude, high-speed combat, and instead forcing engagements during vulnerable phases when the speed advantage disappeared. This was not about fair play. This was about survival, about winning. 1 month later, on November 6, 1944, the legendary Chuck Yeager encountered his first Me-262. He was leading a bomber escort mission near Auckmare, Germany, the very base Urban Drew had attacked. Yeager's P-51, named Glamorous Glenn III after his wife Glennis, was cruising at patrol altitude when he spotted Me-262s attempting to intercept the bomber formation. The jets executed their typical tactics, diving through the bomber stream at tremendous speed, firing briefly, then using their velocity advantage to zoom climb back to altitude before the escort fighters could react. Yeager watched the jets disappear into the clouds, seemingly escaping clean. Standard doctrine dictated that chasing Me-262s was futile. It was a waste of fuel and a pointless exercise in futility. But Yeager, ever the maverick, made a calculated gamble. He had the same intelligence as Drew, the same understanding of the jet's Achilles' heel. Those jets had to land somewhere, and they had to land soon because their fuel endurance was severely limited. He broke from the bomber formation, a bold and risky move, and descended through the clouds, emerging at lower altitude near Auckmare Airfield. Below him, Yeager spotted a lone Me-262 in the landing pattern. Gear and flaps extended, speed reduced to perhaps 100 km/h as it lined up on final approach. The German pilot, his focus entirely on the delicate dance of landing, apparently failed to spot the Mustang diving on him from above and behind. Yeager pushed his throttle full forward and trimmed for maximum dive speed. The P-51 accelerated rapidly in the descent, Yeager using gravity to boost his speed above 450 mph. He closed to 400 yards and opened fire, walking his tracers onto the Me-262's wings. Hits sparked along the jet's left wing root and fuselage. The Me-262 pilot, probably wounded or killed by the initial burst, made no evasive maneuver. Yeager continued firing as he closed to point-blank range, pouring rounds into the jet's engines and cockpit. The Me-262's left wing folded upward. The jet rolled inverted and plunged into woods several hundred feet short of the runway threshold, exploding in a ball of orange flame. Yeager had no time to celebrate. Auckmare's defensive guns opened fire immediately, 88mm shells bursting around his Mustang as he screamed across the airfield at high speed and treetop altitude. His only option was to fly straight down the runway, using sheer speed to escape before the flak crews could adjust their aim. Tracers arced across the field from both sides. In the chaos, some rounds fired from one side of the runway actually hit gun positions on the opposite side. Yeager held his P-51 low and fast, cleared the far end of the airfield, and pulled up hard, diving for the relative safety of a nearby valley. He had survived one of the most dangerous tactical situations in air combat, attacking an enemy airfield in daylight at low altitude. But he had also proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Me-262s could be hunted and killed. Yeager later described the engagement with characteristic understatement. "First time I saw a jet, I shot it down. Not very sportsmanlike. But what the hell?" This laconic remark belied the immense skill, courage, and calculated risk-taking that went into that moment. Through late 1944 and into 1945, American fighter pilots refined their anti-jet tactics, based on hard-won experience and carefully analyzed gun camera footage. The P-51 Mustang proved ideal for the mission due to its exceptional range and endurance. A Mustang with full internal fuel and 2 wing-drop tanks could remain airborne for more than 7 hours, giving pilots the ability to loiter near known jet bases for extended periods. This wasn't glamorous dogfighting. It was patient, methodical hunting. When jets appeared, Mustang pilots used their altitude advantage to dive on them, trading height for speed. In the dive, a P-51 could briefly approach or even exceed 500 mph, enough to catch Me-262s during their most exposed moments. Timing was critical. Attacking jets during their takeoff roll required spotting them early and positioning for the attack before they reached flying speed. Catching them on landing approach required immense patience, waiting for the perfect moment when the jet was committed to its approach path with gear and flaps deployed. Its pilot focused on the delicate act of bringing the revolutionary aircraft safely to Earth. Fighter pilots developed an intimate knowledge of Me-262 operational patterns through persistent observation and intelligence analysis. They weren't just reacting, they were studying their prey. They learned that jets typically operated in morning and late afternoon windows when visibility was good, but sun angles complicated visual acquisition for defenders. They noted that Me-262s often flew in pairs or small formations, rarely alone, meaning that destroying one jet frequently provided opportunities to attack others. Crucially, they understood a profound psychological factor. German pilots, constrained by fuel limitations, could not wave off landing approaches and go around for another attempt. Once an Me-262 committed to landing with low fuel remaining, the pilot had no choice but to continue, regardless of threats. This knowledge gave attacking Mustang pilots a crucial advantage. The jet pilot knew he was exposed but could not abort. The Mustang pilot could press his attack with confidence that his target would not suddenly accelerate and escape. It was a form of psychological warfare, leveraging the enemy's limitations against them. The Luftwaffe's defensive measures, of course, grew increasingly sophisticated in response to these relentless tactics. They were fighting for their lives, their airfields, their very war effort. Flak alleys became denser, with some approach corridors defended by more than 100 guns of various calibers, creating truly terrifying zones of aerial denial. Fighter cover increased, with FW-190D and TA-152H pilots ordered specifically to engage Allied fighters near jet bases, regardless of the tactical situation. Me-262 pilots received instructions to vary their approach patterns, making random turns and altitude changes to complicate interception. Some bases even deployed smoke generators to obscure the field during landing operations, attempting to literally hide their precious jets from the relentless hunters above. But despite these desperate efforts, the mathematical reality could not be changed. Me-262s needed specific bases with specific fuel supplies, and they could only remain airborne for limited durations. Allied fighters, conversely, could saturate the areas around jet bases, making an engagement nearly inevitable. It was a war of attrition, not just of aircraft, but of opportunity. February 25, 1945, produced one of the most devastating demonstrations of these tactics. Mustangs of the 55th Fighter Group surprised an entire staff of Me-262s at Giebelstadt Airfield during takeoff operations. The attack was perfectly timed, with P-51s arriving just as multiple jets began their takeoff rolls, their engines straining, their pilots locked into the vulnerable seconds of acceleration. In the chaos that followed, American pilots destroyed 6 Me-262s on the ground or during takeoff, with several more damaged. The losses represented a significant percentage of the operational jets available to that unit. German records indicate the Me-262s belonged to the ill-fated KG-54, a bomber unit that had been re-equipped with jets, but whose pilots lacked adequate fighter training. The 55th Fighter Group's attack demonstrated that concentrated fighter sweeps against jet bases during known operational periods could achieve dramatic results, though at considerable risk. Several Mustangs were damaged by defensive fire during the engagement, and the tactical success depended on achieving complete surprise, a rare commodity in war. The psychological impact of these defeats on German jet pilots was profound and cumulative. Me-262 pilots were not ordinary aviators. They were elite, carefully selected, and extensively trained, often veterans with considerable combat experience. They understood their technological advantages and initially approached missions with justified confidence in their aircraft's capabilities. They were flying the future. Repeated losses during takeoff and landing phases, however, began to create an atmosphere of dread surrounding these critical moments. Pilots knew that every departure and every return carried a significant risk of ambush. The knowledge that Allied fighters might be waiting, that there was no escape option once committed to landing, that fuel gauges showed empty tanks, created psychological pressure that inevitably affected performance and decision-making. Imagine the feeling. You've just outrun every piston fighter in the sky. You've threaded the needle through a bomber formation, but the most dangerous part of your mission is still ahead of you. A slow, predictable descent into a hail of bullets you can't outrun. It was a mental gauntlet as much as a physical one. The March 18th, 1945 raid on Berlin illustrated both the Me-262's potential and its ultimate inability to change the war's outcome. A massive formation of 1,221 Allied bombers, escorted by 632 fighters, attacked the German capital in what would be the last great air battle over Germany. Luftwaffe commanders, in a desperate attempt to stem the tide, assembled 37 Me-262s from Jagdgeschwader 7 for a coordinated attack on the bomber formations, the largest jet force yet committed to a single mission. Oberleutnant Günther Wegmann led his squadron in a loose formation toward the incoming bombers. For the first time in operational use, he and his wingmen fired R-4M unguided rockets. These 50mm rockets, carried in underwing racks of 12 per aircraft, were designed to detonate near bombers, destroying them with blast and fragmentation without requiring precise aim. Wegmann's rockets slashed into a formation of 60 B-17s, and observers reported multiple bombers hit and falling. Other Me-262 pilots pressed attacks with conventional 30mm cannon, their speed allowing them to make multiple passes before escorts could react effectively. The engagement was brief but intense. German pilots claimed 12 bombers and 1 fighter shot down, though United States records indicate 8 heavy bombers were actually lost, along with 3 Me-262s destroyed in air combat. The discrepancy between claims and actual losses illustrated the common wartime pattern of overclaiming due to the sheer confusion and adrenaline of combat. But even accepting German claims at face value, the jets destroyed less than 1% of the attacking force, while the massive bomber formation reached its target and delivered its ordnance. The strategic bombing campaign continued, largely unaffected. 5 American fighter pilots failed to return, and dozens of bomber crew members were killed or became prisoners. But for Allied planners, the mission was a complete success. Adolf Galland, Germany's former general of fighters, a man who had been dismissed after disputes with Hermann Göring over fighter strategy, formed Jagdverband 44 in February 1945. This was an elite Me-262 unit, commanded by and composed of Germany's most experienced aces. The roster read like a who's who of Luftwaffe legends, pilots with hundreds of combined victories. The unit was given priority for aircraft, fuel, and support, representing Germany's last, desperate attempt to field jet fighters in meaningful numbers under optimal conditions. Galland himself flew combat missions, scoring victories with both cannon and the R-4M rockets. Other pilots reported successes against bombers and even against escorting fighters when conditions favored jet tactics. Yet, Jagdverband 44's operational life was measured in weeks, not months. Allied bombing of bases forced constant relocation, scattering their efforts. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft for days at a time. Engine reliability problems meant that typically half the assigned jets were unserviceable, awaiting spare parts or engine replacements. Even with the best pilots, the best machines, and priority resources, the systemic failures of a collapsing nation were simply too much to overcome. The statistical reality of Me-262 operations further revealed the vast gap between theoretical capability and practical effectiveness. German records indicate approximately 1 Me-262s were manufactured during the war. Of those, only around 200 to 300 ever saw combat operations. The remainder were destroyed on the ground by bombing, lost during training, or rendered unserviceable by maintenance problems. At no point did the Luftwaffe have more than 50 km operationally ready simultaneously, and typical daily availability was closer to 25 aircraft. This minuscule force faced an Allied fighter strength exceeding 5,000 aircraft at any given time, plus thousands more bombers. The mathematics were insurmountable. Me-262 pilots claimed approximately 542 Allied aircraft destroyed in air-to-air combat, though verification of these claims shows the usual wartime overclaiming by all sides. Post-war analysis by American researchers suggested actual losses to Me-262s were substantially lower. Allied forces destroyed Me-262s at rates exceeding German production and training capabilities. American records credit P-51 Mustangs with 92. 5 confirmed. 262 shootdowns, though this number includes aircraft destroyed on the ground and during takeoff or landing, not just air-to-air engagements. The 357th Fighter Group, Chuck Yeager's unit, led American forces with 18.5 confirmed jet kills. The 55th Fighter Group claimed 17, while the 78th and 339th Fighter Groups each credited 15. British forces, particularly flying Hawker Tempests and Spitfires, claimed an additional dozen jet kills. The cumulative effect was that Me-262 losses exceeded replacements, and the operational force steadily declined despite production continuing until Germany's surrender. German ace pilots who flew the Me-262 offered mixed assessments of its effectiveness in post-war interviews, providing invaluable insights into the realities of flying this revolutionary machine. Georg Peter Eder, who scored 12 kills in the jet, including 9 P-51s, acknowledged that the aircraft's speed made high-altitude bomber interceptions relatively safe, but that Allied countermeasures increasingly negated this advantage. The feeling of invulnerability, once absolute, was fleeting. Walter Dahl, credited with 11 jet victories, including 6 Mustangs, emphasized that fuel limitations and engine reliability problems severely restricted tactical options, to the point where the jet's theoretical superiority became largely irrelevant in practical operations. Imagine being a fighter pilot, flying the fastest thing in the sky, but constantly looking at your fuel gauge, knowing your engines might quit at any moment, your options dictated not by your skill, but by the machine's fragility. Heinrich Baer, with 16 Me-262 kills from his total of 240 career victories, stated flatly that the jet arrived too late and in too few numbers to matter. A stark, brutal assessment from one of the greatest fighter pilots of all time. Franz Schall, the type's probable top ace with 17 kills, including 6 four-engine bombers and 10 P-51s, was killed in action in April 1945. But his earlier reports emphasized the aircraft's inability to engage maneuvering fighters effectively due to its high approach speeds and wide turning radius, another paradox of power. The tactical lessons learned from Me-262 operations influenced post-war jet fighter development worldwide. Allied engineers studied captured jets intensively, testing them at facilities in the United States and Britain. They confirmed that the basic design was sound. The concept of jet propulsion was undeniably the future. But engine technology remained the critical limiting factor. Early American jets like the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star and the Republic F-84 Thunderjet, and Soviet designs like the MiG-15, directly incorporated solutions to problems identified in the Me-262. Longer engine life, better throttle response, improved fuel efficiency, and stronger airframes addressed the specific vulnerabilities that Allied fighters had so effectively exploited. American pilots who successfully engaged Me-262s became recognized experts within the fighter community. Their combat reports studied carefully by intelligence officers and training instructors. Beyond Urban Drew and Chuck Yeager, dozens of other pilots scored jet kills through the persistent application of the tactics developed through hard experience. These pilots shared common characteristics: exceptional eyesight, precise gunnery skills, aggressive temperaments, and a willingness to accept risks that more cautious pilots avoided. Attacking jet bases through dense flak required courage bordering on recklessness. Yet these pilots repeatedly flew such missions because they understood the strategic importance of neutralizing the jet threat. They were the tip of the spear, the human countermeasure to a technological marvel. The human cost of these engagements affected both sides severely. American fighter pilots killed during attacks on jet bases died far from home, often in fiery crashes after flak damage. Their bodies sometimes never recovered from crash sites in Germany. German Me-262 pilots, the elite of the Luftwaffe, were irreplaceable assets, lost at rates that Germany's shrinking training program could not sustain. Each dead or captured German jet pilot represented hundreds of hours of training, millions of Reichmarks in investment, and tactical experience built over years of combat. The stress contributed to errors in judgment, accidents during takeoff and landing, and declining combat effectiveness even among experienced aviators. The weight of a collapsing nation rested heavily on their shoulders. The infrastructure supporting Me-262 operations collapsed progressively through early 1945. As Allied armies advanced into Germany and strategic bombing intensified, specialized jet fuel became increasingly scarce as refineries were bombed or captured. Replacement engines, already in short supply due to production bottlenecks, became unavailable when factories were destroyed or fell to advancing forces. Spare parts for airframes and systems disappeared from supply chains. Trained maintenance personnel were killed in bombing raids or reassigned to infantry units, As Germany grew desperate for soldiers, airfields themselves came under direct ground attack as front lines moved eastward. By April 1945, Me-262 units were operating from sections of Autobahn or improvised strips, hiding aircraft in woods and working with minimal supplies under constant threat of air attack. The dream of aerial supremacy was reduced to a desperate fight for survival, often on a literal dirt road. The final weeks of Me-262 operations, in April and early May 1945, were characterized by sporadic sorties flown by scattered units operating independently as central command and control disintegrated. Individual pilots flew missions when fuel was available, often attacking targets of opportunity rather than executing coordinated operations. Some pilots chose to fly their jets to Allied-held territory and surrender rather than continuing hopeless combat. Others flew final missions, knowing that return would be impossible due to fuel shortages or airfield capture, choosing to go down fighting for a lost cause. A few, including members of Jagdverband 44, flew combat until literally the final days of the war, achieving kills even as Germany's military structure collapsed completely, a testament to their unwavering, if ultimately futile, professionalism. Post-war analysis by American and British aviation experts reached a consensus. The Me-262 represented a revolutionary technological achievement that arrived too late to affect the war's outcome. Even if Hitler had not delayed production by demanding bomber variants, even if engine reliability had been better, even if more were produced, the fundamental strategic situation made the jet's impact limited. Germany in 1944 lacked fuel, lacked trained pilots, lacked air superiority necessary for safe operations, and faced overwhelming numerical disadvantage against Allied air forces. The Me-262 could not solve these problems, regardless of its performance advantages. It was a technological diamond in a crumbling, starved empire. The legacy of the Me-262 versus Mustang engagements extended far beyond World War II, influencing air combat doctrine for generations. The fundamental principle that technological superiority does not guarantee tactical success became a case study taught at military academies worldwide. The importance of exploiting enemy vulnerabilities rather than engaging strengths became embedded in fighter pilot training. The recognition that even revolutionary weapons systems have exploitable weaknesses informed military planning and procurement strategies throughout the Cold War and beyond. The specific tactics developed by American pilots to counter the Me-262's speed advantage, using altitude to build speed in dives, timing attacks for vulnerable flight phases, and persistent patrolling of known enemy operating areas, remained relevant as new generations of fighters with performance advantages emerged. Individual pilot accounts from the period provided rich detail about the psychological and tactical challenges of these engagements. Chuck Yeager, in his autobiography and numerous interviews, emphasized that destroying the Me-262 required accepting exceptional risk and making split-second decisions with imperfect information. He described the tension of loitering near German airfields, knowing that flak and enemy fighters would engage the moment he attacked. The calculation required to time his dive for maximum speed at the critical moment, and the profound satisfaction of proving that American fighters could defeat the seemingly invincible jets. His story is not just about a kill, but about the human mind at the edge of the possible. Urban Drew, after receiving his belated recognition in 1983, spoke about the frustration of having his victories denied for nearly 40 years due to lack of corroborating evidence, but also about the importance of the mission, regardless of personal recognition. His experience underscores the idea that duty, courage, and impact can transcend immediate acclaim. His fight for recognition was as much a battle against bureaucracy as his aerial combat was against the enemy. The engineering lessons from Me-262 operations directly influenced the development of the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter, which entered service just as World War II ended. Lockheed engineers studied captured Me-262s extensively, examining their engines, airframes, and systems to understand both successes and failures. The P-80's design incorporated longer-lasting engines with better throttle response, addressing the most critical Me-262 weakness. Improved fuel efficiency extended range beyond the Me-262's 650-mile maximum. Stronger landing gear reduced the accident rate that plagued German jet operations. Better cockpit visibility enhanced pilot situational awareness during vulnerable takeoff and landing phases. The enemy's brilliant but flawed design became a teacher for the next generation of American aviation. Soviet designers similarly studied Me-262 technology, with captured aircraft and engines shipped to research facilities where they were extensively tested. The information gleaned influenced designs like the MiG-15 and Yak-15, though Soviet engineers also incorporated British engine technology obtained through espionage and technology transfer. The global proliferation of jet fighter knowledge that resulted from Me-262 analysis accelerated the transition from piston to jet propulsion that dominated the late 1940s and 1950s. Within 10 years of World War II's end, propeller-driven fighters had become obsolete for frontline service, replaced by jets in virtually every air force worldwide. The Me-262, despite its failures, irrevocably changed the face of aerial warfare. The final accounting of Me-262 operations reveals an aircraft that achieved tactical successes but strategic failure. Individual pilots scored impressive kill totals, and specific missions demonstrated the jet's capabilities when conditions favored it. However, the cumulative impact on Allied air operations was minimal. Strategic bombing continued unabated. Allied fighters maintained air superiority, and ground forces advanced into Germany with effective air support throughout. The resources devoted to Me-262 development and production, including scarce materials, manufacturing capacity, and skilled labor, might have produced more conventional fighters that could have been operated more effectively with available fuel and pilot training. The story of German pilots flaunting their jets until Mustang aces caught them during vulnerable moments is, ultimately, a story about the limits of technological solutions to strategic problems. Germany developed the world's first operational jet fighter, achieving a genuine breakthrough that should have provided significant tactical advantages. Yet this achievement could not overcome fundamental disadvantages in numbers, resources, fuel availability, trained personnel, and strategic position. American and Allied pilots, flying less advanced aircraft but supported by overwhelming industrial capacity, comprehensive training systems, reliable logistics, and sound tactical doctrine, defeated the technological marvel through persistence, innovation, and professional excellence. They understood that technology is merely a tool, the hand that wields it, and the system that supports it are what truly matter. In the final analysis, the Me-262 stands as one of aviation history's most fascinating might-have-beens. An aircraft that demonstrated the future but arrived too late to change the past. Its combat record, while impressive in specific engagements, was ultimately insufficient to affect the war's outcome. The American pilots who developed and executed tactics to counter the jet threat earned their place in aviation history not through technological superiority, but through tactical excellence, courage, and a refusal to concede advantage to an apparently invincible opponent. Their success validated the principle that human factors, including training, doctrine, leadership, and determination, can overcome technological disadvantages when properly applied. The transformation from German confidence to Allied dominance in the jet versus Mustang encounters occurred within less than a year, from October 1944, when the first Me-262 was shot down, to May 1945, when the last jet operations ceased. This rapid shift resulted not from any single factor, but from the cumulative effect of systematic exploitation of Me-262 vulnerabilities, combined with relentless pressure that prevented the Luftwaffe from ever achieving sustainable jet operations. Every Me-262 destroyed during takeoff or landing was one less available for bomber interceptions. Every pilot killed or captured represented irreplaceable experience and training. Every successful Allied attack on jet bases forced German operations to become more dispersed and less coordinated. It was a slow, grinding victory, earned piecemeal. The final months of Me-262 operations witnessed German pilots fighting with increasing desperation as their tactical situation deteriorated. Fuel shortages limited sorties to the most critical missions. Engine problems grounded aircraft for extended periods. Allied fighter patrols made every takeoff and landing potentially fatal. Base relocations disrupted operations and morale. Yet some pilots continued flying combat missions until the war's final hours, demonstrating remarkable courage and professionalism despite impossible odds. These men knew they could not win, but flew anyway, motivated by various combinations of duty, honor, and a dwindling hope that their sacrifices might somehow matter. The story concluded not with a dramatic final battle, but with gradual dissolution as Germany's military infrastructure collapsed completely in early May 1945. Me-262s were abandoned on airfields, pushed into woods to prevent capture, or destroyed by their own pilots and crews to deny them to advancing forces. A few were flown to Allied territory and surrendered. Most simply stopped flying as fuel ran out, and maintenance became impossible. The jets that had promised to sweep Allied bombers from German skies ended their operational lives scattered across Germany, silent testaments to the gap between technological potential and operational reality. The Mustang pilots who had hunted them returned home as the war ended, their mission accomplished. The jet threat neutralized through tactics that had proven superior to technology. So, what can we learn from this extraordinary chapter in history? Lesson 1. Technology is a powerful tool, but never a silver bullet. The Me-262 was groundbreaking, a machine born of genius. But without the supporting ecosystem, reliable logistics, ample resources, well-trained personnel, and a sound strategic framework, even the most advanced technology can falter. This is a vital insight for anyone involved in innovation today. A brilliant product needs a robust infrastructure to thrive and truly succeed. Lesson 2. The human element is paramount. The P-51 Mustang was not technologically superior to the Me-262. It was slower, less advanced. Yet, the courage, adaptability, training, and sheer determination of the Allied pilots, coupled with astute leadership and flexible doctrine, allowed them to overcome this technological deficit. Their meticulous analysis of enemy weaknesses, their willingness to innovate tactics, and their relentless persistence turned the tide. In any endeavor, whether in war, business, or personal challenge, the human capacity for adaptation, resilience, and ingenuity can often outweigh perceived disadvantages. Lesson 3. Exploit vulnerabilities. Don't just admire strengths. Allied commanders and pilots didn't try to outspeed the Me-262 at altitude. They understood its strength lay there. Instead, they focused on its weaknesses, the fragile engines, the fuel limitations, the critical moments of takeoff and landing. This strategic thinking, identifying and targeting the Achilles heel, is a timeless principle. When facing a seemingly superior opponent or a daunting challenge, don't fall into the trap of trying to match their strengths directly. Find their points of vulnerability, their operational constraints, and strike there. The story of the Me-262 and the Mustang Aces is more than just a historical footnote. It's a vivid, dramatic illustration of enduring principles. It reminds us that true power lies not just in what you possess, but in how you use it. It's about the intricate dance between innovation and implementation, between potential and practicality. And above all, it's a testament to the extraordinary human spirit, which, even amidst the most destructive conflicts, finds ways to adapt, to overcome, and to secure victory against seemingly insurmountable odds. The roar of the jet and the thrum of the propeller may have faded, but the lessons they taught echo through time, as clear and profound today as they were in the skies over war-torn Germany.